Next Level Conversation with Jeff Gabriel.
Roger, welcome to the Next Level Conversation. It is November 12th, 8:34 Eastern Time, and it's a pleasure to have you here this evening. How are you?
Great, I'm good. I'm happy to be here, Jeff. It kind of gets me up, and keeping myself awake is a good thing now at these late hours of 8:30, right?
Oh, really? Is this considered late for you?
Some days it is. If I get up super early, like at 3 or 4, it's kind of getting late around now. But other nights I go to 2 o'clock in the morning pretty comfortably.
You get up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning?
Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, and it seems to be like an increasing sort of experience for me. So I'm letting it happen.
Are you getting up because you're spooked in the evening, or you're Amish, or what?
I think my dad woke up early, so maybe I'm adopting some of his traits from the beyond. Maybe he's like nudging me. He says, "Hey, there's more hours out there if you get up right before the sun comes up instead of 2 hours after." So we'll play with it. I typically love staying up late and getting up late, but I'm trying to shift that and just see what happens.
Right. There's no way I can get up before 7 a.m. But it's actually interesting. How I know you actually was sort of an accident. I mean, we're related. I didn't know we were related. You're very closely removed. Actually, you could probably tell me our relationship better than I can, how we're related. Can you do that?
Okay, I can give it a shot. Yeah. So your mother, okay, her mother was my father's sister.
So our grandparents are brother and sister.
Our grandparents are brother and sister. I don't know if I would go that far, but
my grandmother and your grandfather are brother and sister. So one on each side.
Now I don't know if I know your grandmother. I'm talking about your mother. So your mother, her mother, that would be your grandmother. That's right. I forget. And you probably didn't even know Kate, right?
I didn't know Kate, but I knew my mom's mom.
Okay.
Who was Rita.
Oh, Rita, there we go. So I lost a generation, Jeff. So I don't do the lineage thing that often. So you're absolutely right on this one. Yeah. So basically, your mom is my cousin. So your mom, Marcy, so she and I would see each other growing up as kids. She was always a few years older than me. So she was definitely cool. I mean, she'd show up at the grandparents' house wearing, I don't know, whatever, like tight pants and, the blouse.
Really?
Oh, yeah. She was a trendsetter. She looked cool, acted cool. And, but that's our connection, basically.
Yeah. It's amazing, you go through life and you don't realize, I mean, I'm sure this happens in many families, or people have families, certain sectors on the outside of the family that sort of drift apart. But, in reality, we're only a few cousins away from each other in relationship. And, here you are in New Hampshire, you have this interesting life. Here I am down in New Jersey, and I have this completely different life, but we are related. And we just, got reacquainted, I don't know, 7 months ago.
Yeah, it was right sort of pre-COVID. What happened was my sister had connected with your mom. So I thought, hey, let me go meet Marcy again after X number of years, let's say after 45 years for rough numbers, or even more probably, actually after 50 plus years. So she was awesome. So I stopped at her place and we had dinner in the city, and then she told me about you. So I was like, oh, great. So the next morning I drove out to your place and we connected. So it was a real total surprise.
You're like, hey, you have a crazy son? I want to meet him too. Cool.
Yeah. And when she said he flies helicopters, I'm like, oh, that sounds like fun too, But but it was great because your mom she's really a great person. I mean, she's been through a lot of stuff in her life. She's an artist, which I love artists, and so we were sharing stories about, our parents and grandparents that neither of us really knew. I told her some stuff about my dad and about our combined grandfather, Max, and his trip back to Europe many years to try to pull his family out of Poland before the Holocaust. And it was just great because we were actually talking like we'd been connected forever, but we weren't ever connected really before that moment.
Right. Well, sometimes the genetics helps and sometimes the genetic hurts. And bringing, whether people can connect or not. Some people in family get along, some people don't. I barely have known you, but every time we talk, it's like I've known you for a long time. So, it's interesting, people that are floating out there, or they don't know who people are floating out there that they're related to. You could bump into somebody like Roger and have a nice friendship with. and actually learned some interesting things from. So what were you saying about was it your dad that or your grandfather that moved people or tried to get people out of Poland before the Holocaust?
Yeah. So my grandfather, your mom's grandfather, that would make him your great grandfather, I suppose. Back when the night of broken glass happened, he really was intent on moving his family out of Poland. And he had come over as a 10-year-old boy at the turn of the century. They put him on a boat, if you can imagine, all by himself as a 10-year-old to send him to New York City, thinking there'd be a better life for him there. And this was also at a time where there was some serious discrimination happening in Europe. And so as my grandfather, your great grandfather, got older, he began to, become a little bit affluent. So he had the means to do it. So he basically went over there thinking he could just bring him back on a boat. It didn't work. And he basically advocated for them to get here. He tried to get visas. He went as far as actually visiting the White House and meeting with the president. And I heard this story from him as a kid. I didn't really get the full context.
How did he get the meeting with the president?
No idea. I have a feeling it was through some kind of social political fundraising circle. So maybe it was as simple as he went to a fundraising dinner and then he went right up to the guy. But clear as heck, there's a picture of him and the president somewhere I remember seeing. And yeah, go ahead.
I think the president was a little bit more accessible. I mean, if you saw the movie Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis, I mean, you could basically go and open up the front door and go into if you knew the family, like your friends next door, you could go into the White House and open the front door. I mean, today, that's not happening in this White House, nor would I want to go have lunch with that guy. But anyway, going back to you, I'm sorry.
No, that's cool. But listen, I need to ask you a question. So over your right shoulder there's this cool pillow on the sofa with little stars on it. Can you tell me about that? I know I'm jumping. I'm not the interviewer, but I'm loving seeing that out of the corner of my eye. I'm just wondering about it.
Really, you're interested in that?
Yeah, sure. It's your game.
It's my wife. We have a little boy. He's 3 months, 8. He's 3 years, 8 months.
Yeah.
And those are Halloween pillows for him. He likes skeletons all over the freaking place. So we have skeleton pillows now because of my son. That's what those are.
Very cool.
So your grandfather comes over. Our grandfather comes over. Like I didn't even know this guy.
Right.
And this guy I'm related to, and I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him as well.
Same.
I don't even know him, and I just met you. I just met you 6 months ago, and I'm hearing the story about my grandfather, great grandfather, who comes across on a boat, is 10 years old by himself. So basically, I'm sitting here because some 10-year-old was a badass and could take care of himself on a boat coming across the ocean. I'm serious. I mean, those are the crazy backstories that are going on in people's lives that they have no clue. Yeah. I had no clue. And I find that to be so interesting. So, once, twice, third time removed, whatever you want to call it from that reality. Yeah. So anyway, go ahead. He's 10 years old and he comes over and he, marries a 50-year-old wealthy woman. And what happened? How does it go?
No. So what happened to him, he was, and just try to imagine this, because you're a dad right now. So I remember my kids are grown up now, but sending them off to summer camp when they were 10 years old wasn't always an easy thing to do. It doesn't mean they wanted to go, but just imagine putting some little kid on a boat, who's 10 years old and sending him across the country and saying, look, when you get to New York, we've got these people that we're kind of related to. We're hoping they take you in. They probably will, but if they don't, this is what you're going to do. So he came over, he got a job, working, cleaning some building, some house, and have ended up working in a sort of a men's clothing store. But by the time he was 21, he was in the business. He owned a couple of stores, and he, really devoted himself to his family, to the point that I guess the story I heard from my dad was that his dad, our grandpa, was never around. He was always working, which is something, of course, we can hear from kids nowadays too, about their dads and moms,
Yeah, I can understand that, coming over on a boat by yourself might put the fear of God in you and want you, people in that era, they worked really hard. People in my generation, it's a bit decadent. I mean, they work really hard too. And there's no decadence right now because of the pandemic, but just a different time for sure. Different time. But didn't he have some small department stores, or was it just a chain of stores?
Yeah,
what was it?
He owned 2 clothing stores, and then as he got a little older, I think he sold them and became part of a company called Mangles. So Mangles was a large men's clothing store chain, I think headquartered in the South somewhere. So he worked for them, and he did quite well. And you know, and he even like set up my dad. My dad came home from World War II, and his father expected him to come into the family business, but my dad had no interest in selling clothes. He wanted to design airplanes. So that was sort of the first falling out that happened, in the family, like where one generation really didn't follow the path of the next.
What? You don't want to sell clothes? You want to build planes? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, and then they had a big argument about it, And finally, it ended up that my grandfather sort of convinced my dad, well, don't build planes because nobody wants them, but why don't you learn how to design and build houses? So I guess the compromise, you could say, was my dad went on to be an architect and maybe let go of one of his dreams, which we all know how to do sometimes,
Right. Right. So he ended up, was he successful building homes or being an architect?
Yeah, he became an architect. He designed our first house. For me, it was a blast. I was 6 years old, and I watched every step of the project, the excavation of the hole, the drawings in his office, building a little model of the house, and going to the roof raising party and watching all the workmen drink beer and have fun, So it was great to actually watch my dad build the house that I grew up in. A real treat.
And you guys were close or close later in life, or you resolved issues later in life, or what was the story?
Yeah, we basically were probably never really close. Like in the early years, I know he took me under his wing and had fun with me. I mean, he was back from the war, back from a horrific experience there, as many men return from. So I remember my early childhood as being really like, yeah, he would do things with me and whatever, take me places. We went camping a little, but there was a disconnect that I always felt emotionally from him. Like I never saw him get angry or sad or anything. I saw him walk away a lot or read the magazine or newspaper a lot. And we basically, he gave me a lot of freedom, which at the time I thought was cool. My friends were like, oh man, that's so cool that your dad doesn't know where you are for a week or a day or whatever. But, I realized as an adult, that's not kind of how we want to be with our kids when they're 12 and 15. We want to, be connected. So we had
he was always like that, though. Even when you had fun as a young boy, you never saw any emotion from him.
Yeah, he was a little bit distant. I could feel something kind of swell up in him, and I can't tell you exactly what it was. Some feeling of moodiness, you could say, but he would withdraw a little bit. And I used to ask him about the war. I mean, he had these wounds on his legs. If he was in a bathing suit, you could see all these blotches and things. And he was one of the guys, and there were many like this who never ever talked about the war. And he almost went his whole life until he finally decided to talk about the war.
Maybe did the war make him like he was like that as a young boy? He was a young boy. He was also like that before he even went to the war.
Hard to say as a boy because he was the youngest of 5 other children, and those other 4 were sisters who were much older than him.
Mm-hmm.
So he came along in kind of this Judaic household where they were happy to have a guy finally to hold the family name, but I don't think he got a lot of attention and support from his dad. And again, I got mixed stories from him. Like he told me that the reason he enlisted when he was 17 and faked his age was because he didn't like his dad. He wanted to get out of the house. And then at other times he would tell me, no, he wanted to save some Jews in Europe. So
maybe,
I never got the story.
Maybe it was both. My dad but your dad recently passed away, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
About a year ago, yeah.
Were you guys on good terms when?
Yeah, we had a huge falling out about 20 years ago when I actually kicked him out of my house. That's a long story, but nevertheless, what transpired after that was we began to kind of build a bridge that became a much stronger bridge than we'd ever have. So our last 10 years together were just beautiful. Like I couldn't get enough of the guy. I would go down to see him like twice a year. He lived in North Carolina, and we just got closer and closer. I didn't even know that relationship was possible. So that was
maybe as you both got older, you guys forgot about the father-son relationship and were just 2 people talking with each other that liked each other, that just cared about each other.
We kind of forged a new relationship. He had definitely cut back on the drinking, began to study Buddhism, and one of the things that happened that was pivotal is he began to talk about those experiences as an 18-year-old in the war, which he hadn't shared for 80 years, literally.
Yeah, I mean, guys in that generation, they weren't going to therapy and they weren't expressing themselves. I mean, I don't want to stereotype all of them, but my dad was like that too. You know, when I was a little boy, he went to all my football games, he went to all my football practices. We spent a lot of time together. But as I got older, he had, you know, as become a young teenager and adolescent, he had a harder time, you know, dealing with me, talking to me on that kind of level. So I always felt, you know, emotionally disconnected to him. And we got a little bit more connected when we got older, when I got older, and we always loved each other. But, you know, he just, he battled. He was not well. So,
Yep.
But it's just interesting how those, you know, relationships develop. But you were down in the New York area, and then you made a move up to New Hampshire, right?
Well, I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, so my folks moved out of the city, raised me out in Connecticut there, and I eventually kind of migrated up to Boston at some point, where I met my wife, and then from there came to New Hampshire.
And how long have you been with your wife?
We've been together 42 years. So,
how's that going?
It's going really well. You know, it's got, like, you're asking me today. So today was a great day in the house, you know, at the house at the end of the road. We live at the end of the road, by the way. And the COVID experience has brought us both together in the house at the same time. Whereas normally she's gone half the time working, you know, somewhere in the world, literally, and I might be out working. So we've really balanced our relationship nicely over the past years because we have time together and time apart. So it's different, and we're doing really well, but we're having to work at it. And I mean that sincerely, work. And we play too.
Right. Same here. So you were down in Connecticut. What made you traverse up to New Hampshire?
Well, I moved from Connecticut to go to college when I was 18, out in Wisconsin at Beloit College. And I think probably the moment I got there, I realized, you know, I wasn't going to be in college for 4 years. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I had a feeling. So until when I left college, I sort of went on the road a little bit. Like pre-college, literally, I was thinking of joining the Air Force. I was like, okay, I think I want to be a fighter pilot. You know, I was thinking about my dad in World War II. I was thinking, hey, maybe I should do that. The Vietnam War was unfolding at that time.
Yeah, not a good time to become a fighter pilot.
Yeah, and my friends, my dad was saying, well, why don't you go to college anyway? Try that out. So I found this one college, Beloit College, that sounded interesting because the way it worked is you went for 1 whole year, then you took 1 whole year off and went out into the real world. So I thought, yeah, maybe I can do that. But essentially what happened is I started to study the war a little bit. And I was, you know, I came to the conclusion at some point that this war made no sense. So my idea of being in the Air Force didn't make any sense either. And slowly but surely, I kind of entered into this, you could call it a crisis of consciousness, where I thought, well, if I'm for the war, I should go fight in it. And if I'm not for it, I should end it or help it be ended. So I basically left college to work, you know, full time towards ending the war. I mean, that became my career for about 2 or 3 years. Literally.
And how does one go about trying to help join the cause of ending the war?
Well, first I realized that in a sense, I didn't have a lot of choice if I wanted to stay within the system. In other words, back then, the way the draft was set up was it kept you in school. Like if you were going to college, you were deferred from being in the military because whoever just deemed that was a great thing, send people to school. But if you were not in college, you could be drafted. So I knew right away, well, if I left college, I was going to get drafted probably. But I also knew that people had choices. They could leave the country. They could actually stay in the country and go to prison. And I was pretty much committed to staying in the country. I didn't want to go to Canada. I liked the country. And I became a draft.
So you shot yourself in the foot.
No, I didn't do that either. Like I didn't want to get a deferment. I mean, this might sound crazy to you, Jeff, but at the time I was this young idealistic kind of guy who was like 18 or 19. But I was torn. It was not a simple decision. I mean, I used to lay awake at night in bed. I kind of got depressed. I mean, trying to decide, well, should I really be in school with this deferment that gives me the right to not go to war, or should I be out there with the other kids who don't have college degrees? And you know, and I thought, well, if I left college, how would I work against the war? I mean, that was a real consideration. I didn't want to just protest and say, hey, the war is no good. And I'll tell you a side story. Basically, in the middle of this whole thing, I was, you know, really getting a little bit depressed. And one night I was lying in my bed, and it was probably my first serious meditation type experience, totally by accident. I had lit a little candle and I was reading this little passage that was in a little book called Lao Tzu that was in my, you know, one of my classes that I was taking. And the passage went something like,
my buddy Lao Tzu.
Yeah, can you throttle your breathing down to the softness of breath in a child? Can you hold to the one and never depart from it? So I began to repeat that in my mind, kind of like a mantra, but I didn't know that's what I was doing. And all of a sudden I got to this really kind of still place where something happened. And what
What
happened,
happened?
yeah, this is the part that's hard to describe. So I'm kind of stretching out when I tell you what happened. I first felt some kind of feeling sort of almost grip me, and I opened my mouth to scream literally, and it, whatever it was, just released me. And then I felt like, well, this is benevolent. This is okay. So let me get back to that place. So I began to breathe slow and calm down whatever I was thinking about. And this time it sort of grabbed me, and I had this experience that it began with sort of a taste or flavor that I had in every cell of my body. So I had this experience where all of a sudden I felt different. I felt more expansive. I began to see aspects of what I would only call the solar system or the universe that were just vast and whatever. And I then could no longer put words to what happened. But at some point, the experience ended. And, I opened my eyes, and the candle that I had lit, which is a big tall candle, like one of these big hippie candles or whatever, it had burned down to nothing. And I knew they lasted like 6 or 8 hours. And the experience I had really lasted about a minute or 5 minutes at the most. So
you got to that place through breathing?
Well, I think breathing, but I also like to be clear. I prefaced it with some sort of anxiety or depression or deep, not introspection, because I didn't even know what that word meant. But I definitely was on edge about, do I leave school? Do I burn my draft card? What do I do? So the next morning I got up and I went to see this guy that I didn't know, but he was head of the religious studies program at the college. And I knock on his door, walk in his office. And he says, yeah, can I help you? And I said, yeah, well, Dr. Crom, can I ask you something? And he's like, yeah, sit down, buddy. So I sat down and I pretty much told him what I just told you. And I said, so what does it mean? Am I psychotic? Did I hadn't done hallucinogenic drugs at that point. Okay. So I didn't really know what that was. It felt way better than the biggest orgasm I could have imagined. So there was a feeling quality to it that was mind blowing.
Try that.
Yeah, but you should try it. But he listens very nicely. And then half the time, like I said, I'm a little uncomfortable talking to this dude. And he says, it sounds like, he said, you know what a mystic experience is? Have you ever heard that word? I said, I never heard that word. He says, well, it sounds like you had one. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he says, well, I don't know. And I don't know that people know, but it happens to people, maybe all of us at some point. And, you get to glimpse some other part of reality. And of course, I didn't know what he was talking about. But I felt a little comforted. So I said, so what do I do with that? And he said, well, I can't really give you advice, but why don't you just see how you feel over the next few days? Like, notice what happens in your life. And I'm telling you this story, Jeff, because all of a sudden, within days, I just shifted my whole path. And I thought, hey, I don't know what I'm going to do next, but this war is really bad. It's sucking life out of a lot of my friends and other people. It's going to have to end at some point. What if I found a way to work in a concerted way towards ending it? So that's what I went off to do for a couple of years. And I had to find ways to do that.
Do you think through this existential experience, that through this breathing and through these moments of this mystic experience that you had, do you think that the universe or some other life force was showing you the way, or giving you an inclination, or you tapped into something that just grounded you for a moment to give you a clearer picture of where you really wanted to go?
Yeah. So in answer to that, I think it was some aspect of the universe. I shy away from the word God a lot in my life for a lot of reasons, but some aspect, hit me over the head or touched me or gave me some gift of maybe nudge or propulsion, but it definitely opened me up to something that was unknown that I didn't figure out. I didn't come back and start a religion or say it's this or that, but yeah, it unseated me. It unstuck me. And that was probably the gift right there. But
try it tonight.
It also led me to ponder, how did I get there? Can I get there again? So that's it.
Yeah. That's my next question. Have you been able to get back to that spot?
In a different way, yes, but not like that. That was like, it just swept out of the blue and took hold of me. And shortly after that, I mean, this doesn't relate to the war and how I worked to not protest the war, but see how we could end the war, because it was going to be ended by a lot of people deciding it wasn't a good war. It would be perpetuated by maybe lots of people saying it's a great war. Let's do it for 40 years, not 10. but somewhere in the midst of that experience, I found myself alone in the woods for 3 or 4 days. and it happened again. It was by accident. I didn't get kicked out of my house. I wasn't like, dropped out of the plane, but I'll just shortcut to the end result of it. So, it was a 3-day sort of self-imposed solo in the woods. Like somebody might say a vision quest, but I wasn't that intelligent to think of that. I thought, okay, what happens if I park myself here with very little food or water? But I knew I wouldn't drown or die because the water was just a shallow river.
Well, let me just say one thing. When people do go through explosive growth periods in their life, and somehow there is an impetus to that happening, there's some inflection point that makes them do what they do, and then you come out the other side and something wonderful happens, or there's some sort of transformation or change in either your psyche, your being, whatever it may be, spiritually, you can say that. We never really, I've had a few of those times in my life. I wouldn't say exactly the way you had it, but I was just going on instinct. Someone just told me to go in that direction, but I couldn't tell you why I was doing it. And then, it was just sort of like some sort of, behavioral energy pushing me in a direction. Like, you better go in this direction because this direction, is not working for you, maybe. Yeah. And sometimes some really interesting good things come out of it, or, just new courses of development. And that happened for me when I left my first career and went to my second career. I know we're not talking about me tonight, but I did want to. No,
but that's what happened for you. So just tell me. I'm just curious. So, how did the transition occur? If that makes sense.
I was 29, 30 years old. I was in a job for 7 years at a college, and I was making really good money, and I wasn't enjoying it. But when I say I wasn't enjoying it, our parents' generation didn't necessarily have the time to enjoy or not enjoy work. My father looked at it as like, you're not enjoying it, you're making a lot of money. And in my generation, the Generation X generation, we had the ability to make choices. We didn't have to get married as quickly. There weren't similar social constraints that past generations had, and we can explore a little. But I went off, and I got into aviation, and I had some odd work in between, but that odd work, in between allowed me to, really get to know myself better. Cool. I met all kinds of different people because of the work that I was doing that I never did before. I was meeting people that I never met before. I was experiencing, relationships with those people, just friendships, people that I would never hang out with before, different ethnicities. And I found, a new level of comfort with myself that I never had before by leaving one very secure job and industry, going into a very indecisive and very, not a secure financial or path, which is typically not what, our families would do. And it was just something that I had to do, but I didn't know I had to do it. And it just made me a better, it's that kind of thing. Like, you kind of like get thrown into some sort of weird vision quest that you didn't shoot. You really don't, I'm saying you don't consciously select it. You just sort of, it feels right. I'm going to go here and see where it takes me. You just go down that road. And that's what happened to me. And that's what led to meeting the people that I met, the network of people that I met in Manhattan, the businesses that I ended up starting that took 10, 12, 13 years to build. I mean, that would have never happened if I didn't walk out of that job because I was so unhappy. A lot of people don't do that. I'm not patting myself on the back. I mean, there was like 2 years when I was just literally so full of anxiety. I know why there's such anxiety when you leave a comfortable situation like that. But if you can do it, sometimes there's plenty of people out there that have done it. I'm not the only one, but if people are listening, and you want to make a leap, it's very uncomfortable, and growth always is associated with discomfort, a lot of discomfort. Yeah. So that's the story. That was it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that adage.
You asked.
Like that adage, no pain, no gain. Like you said, we fall into it. We don't always do it consciously, but once we're in it, things can happen. Yeah. So for me, even that kind of solo experience was trying to recapture that earlier magical, whatever you want to call it, mystical experience. And And what I found is the first day I just like was hungry. I didn't have any food. I had some water. The second and third day I just missed people, fantasized around being around my friends. But the third night I had a little kind of experience happen that was like, oh, this feels really foreign and strange, but really comfortable and beautiful. So what happened slowly but surely is I adopted sort of an annual trip into the woods, which I still do by myself. And so that's kind of where I go with that time. I spend some time alone, but I do it decisively, and pack my bags and I find a remote area somewhere and I camp. And it served me really well over the years. I still do it.
And right, what do you like going and you like just sort of recapitulate all the things that have happened to you in your life?
Yeah, I'll think about life. I'll try to blank my mind. Also, I'll try just to do nothing because I do so much, and so many of us do so much 24/7 that what I found, it's not the escape or the elixir of the rest from it. There's some, I shy away again from the word like enlightenment, but there's some other kind of knowing that happens when we distance ourselves from people and input
Right.
and everything, as simple as turning off our cell phone sounds. It's not that simple to turn it off for a week,
Right. You can definitely experience some different experiences, how you perceive reality, different inputs. That's for sure. There are definitely other realities, and our ability to scan them is just limited to the ones that we can see right now. But there's definitely a lot more going on than what we can see right now.
Totally. And it's be presumptuous of me or probably anyone to say we got it figured out. Like I know the level of comfort that says, hey, this is exactly what happens when we die. We go here, we do this. These are the rules. This is how you do that. But if that works for somebody, that's great. Like I totally honor people's ability to be told or design or be part of some system that works. It's great. But everyone also can choose their own path to figure out what that means. And for me, I think, and I was with my dad while he died, he leaned over to me and his last words were like, how are you doing? And I'm not talking about your job and yourself. So there was like a deeper question, which I couldn't answer. I didn't even know what he meant exactly. But afterwards, I kind of got, life is here for us to explore different ways. And I pretty much, I shouldn't say I fulfilled my role as being a father, but, bringing a couple of people into the world and helping them have some food and clothes and some emotional and spiritual support might be the greatest task in life or that I've done, so his kind of question to me was like, so what else is there for you? Is there something else? And, that's
How old were you when he asked that?
He asked me that last year when he died.
Well, he was, sometimes
he was 95. I mean, he lived a pretty full life. So he was kind of passing on, I think, some kind of torch of like, hey, there's some more to figure out. And he was still figuring it out. There was no doubt about that. He knew less when he died about life, he told me, than when he was early or younger.
He knew less about life.
Yeah, he said, I mean, but he was really clear that when he was able to some degree heal from his war experience, which he carried for, 60 or 70 or 80 years of his life, 70 actually, I saw him blossom and change. I mean, I'd heard those stories that people who are traumatized, once they can push through it a little bit, they can be more alive. But his coming alive, it happened so quickly in that sense.
Yeah.
So.
But, when sometimes people that care about one another or people that are really good friends with, sometimes it's a very general question, but the question is, and they'll say it a certain way, or I say it a certain way. I'll say it to like a buddy of mine. I'll be like, or a woman that I know that I'm friends with, and I'll say, how are you doing? What's going on? And it's not necessarily about like a specific topic or job or work. It's more or less like, are you freaking out? Are you freaking out or you're not? Are you okay? Are you calm? Or are you full of anxiety? Are you in fear, or are you, they're not gonna, people usually look at me when I say, how are you? They're like, I don't know. I'm good, man. It's like, it's a tough question sometimes for people to answer.
And I think I said to you when you asked me earlier how I was, I said, I think I'm okay, and I feel okay, but, but really quick, like my dad was, he never would go to a veterans parade or anything. And so this is Veterans Day yesterday. So this is kind of on my mind. So So basically, probably, 8 or 10 years ago, I dragged him to a Veterans Day parade down in North Carolina where he was living. He didn't really want to go, but he agreed to go. And I said, look, I'll walk along the parade route with you. If you get tired, just call me and I'll just pull you right off. And he was one of I think 5 World War II vets marching. He was walking with his cane and another guy was walking. And then there were 3 men in a golf cart behind them. And I think he wasn't prepared for how people would treat him. So as they walked along, people were waving flags and cheering. But when these World War II vets came by, people would come out and hug them, and older people would say, "We love you." And there was a different experience for him. And where I kind of led him at the end of the parade, there was they had little picnic tables set up, and the guys and gals in the parade were sitting down, having hot dogs. So I found this table where there were a bunch of vets, younger vets, and I said, "Hey, this is my dad." I sat him down, but I whispered in some of their ears. I said, "Listen, I know you guys have a weekly and a monthly VA talk chat group. See if you can get him to join it." And that was really the thing that broke it open for him. A couple of weeks later, he calls me and he says, "Hey, I took your advice and I go to this meeting now, and it's really great." He says, "The guys say I'm helping them, but I don't think I'm helping them because they're worse than I was. They have drug problems and stuff." He says, but they're really helping me." And at that point, we began to grow close, and he actually told me some stories. He told me his whole story of the war, landing in Normandy, D-Day, and all that. But
he was on the beach.
Yeah, he was on the beaches. But the story that he wanted to tell me, I mean, he told me, we talked for many days about different things. He finally got to the story of how he got wounded, and that's really what I wanted to hear, because he never answered that question when I was younger. I mean, I knew he had medals, and I knew he had landed and done this or that, sort of. Didn't even know what it meant, of course. So what happened was, he says, well, when we got to that part of the story, this was after 3 months in France, so this was like September. Okay, so they landed June. So he fought across France with the guys, and during the breakout, he was in General Patton's lead division of GIs who were sort of the furthest advanced towards Germany. They hadn't crossed the border yet; they were still in France. So the story he told me was how they got to this river one night, and they tried to cross it, and they knew there were Germans heavily, dug in on the other side. So they sent this message back to their command headquarters, which was like, "We can't cross this river because it's held by the Germans. What do we do?" And my dad told me all he remembered was the next morning in broad daylight, they were ordered to cross the river. And he told me that they never crossed a river or a field during the day, ever, in France. And he said, we were all freaked out. And basically, he said, we crossed the river, and he says, I don't know what happened next, more or less. So what happened next was he was in a battle, a very little known battle called the Battle of Horseshoe Woods, that happened by accident, that never received any recognition because it was a military mistake, which happens in times of war. But when my dad told me the story, he remembers what happened at the beginning of the crossing and then the fighting. But he said, he says, I got wounded, I think on day 2, and I don't know how they got me out, but some medics got me back. And he woke up in a hospital in England, okay, a month later. So when he told me that story, I picked his brain for the location, etc. And he says, yeah, it was here and there and there. I said, well, did you ever go back? Because I know he and my mom had gone back in 1970 to Normandy and had driven the path of his trek across France. He said, yeah, I went to that town, but I didn't see anything. I saw a river, but I wasn't sure if that was the same river. So I basically, based on his story, decided to go to France and look for the battle site. And that's that's a longer story I could tell you maybe in 5 minutes, but he was kind of intrigued that I was willing to go. And I said, well, Dad, it's not just for you. I mean, I'll find out. If I find out anything, I'll let you know. But I was really curious because I never heard of that battle. I looked on the internet. I couldn't find anything that happened there. This was like maybe 8 or 10 years ago. So I went to France. I stayed in this little Airbnb a couple towns away, because in the teeny town where this battle happened, supposedly, there was no hotel. It was a very teeny town, about 10 hours outside of Paris. And so the host of this B&B that I'm staying at, she had been peppering me with questions on the internet the whole month before I came on the trip, like, why are you coming? And I told her to look for this battle site that my dad was at. And then she always writes me back like once a week saying, great, we have this whole tour planned for you. And I'm like, no, I don't want the tour. Thank you very much. And she would say, no, you don't understand, you know, and I would say, look, politely, look, you don't understand. I just want to stand on the battle site. I don't need a tour. So anyway,
she knew, but she knew about the battle site. She knew that it existed.
She just said to me, oh, there's some people that want to see you. And this is her typing in broken English and me not speaking a lot of French. So when I end up at their little house, you know, I'm there with my rented car. She says, okay, so we're going to go with you tomorrow. You're meeting these people at 10 o'clock. And I'm like, what people, you know? So she set up this whole thing. So she said, trust me, you have to go. And then the people call and she puts me on the phone with them and they say, yeah, well, why don't you come at 9 instead? And I'm like, what? You know, so they say, come at 9 because there's a ceremony that we want you to go to. So at that point, I've like given up. I say, okay, I'll be part of this. Well, the next morning I wake up and the husband and wife want to drive me there. And I'm like, no, I got to rent a car. And they say, well, how about we drive in front of you so you can find it? And I say, no, I've got a GPS. And then they say, well, we've got our daughter. She needs driving practice. She's getting her license test. How about we still drive in front of you? I said, great. Anyway, you know, these people were trying to be nice to me. And I was a little baffled, but I was like, whatever. So we drive there. This little town is called Corny, C-O-R-N-Y. They drop me off at this church. There's a little gathering. So what's going on that day is the commemoration of the liberation of the concentration camp. So this little French town is having a ceremony. So I meet my two guys, a husband and wife. I have no idea who they are. They tell me, you know, hey, we're going to hang out with you. After this, we're going to go have lunch and get to know you. And then we're going to take you to the battle site and tell you about it. But we know you want to be on the site by yourself. So we're going to leave you by yourself when we're done. Anyway, so we go in this church after this little wreath laying ceremony in this little teeny town, and it's 9:30 in the morning. You know, people are drinking champagne and wine. I'm drinking coffee. They're eating croissant. And every once in a while, someone comes up to me who's probably 80 or 90 and just hugs me or starts crying. And I have no idea what the frig is going on. And so I say to my new guides who are about my age, I say, what's this? What's going on? They said, oh, they know you're a relative of a GI from Horseshoe Woods battle. And I'm like, well, I still didn't even know what that meant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they basically told me the whole story of the battle. And again, condensed version is 900 guys got to this river, just like my dad said. They were the lead advance of the U.S. infantry. They tried to cross it at night, were repelled, sent orders back to command, which was Patton, said we can't cross it. The orders got screwed up. The message from command, which was Patton, came back the next morning, cross the river, hold the position until you're relieved. So it was a bogus order that had just been mixed up because of some communication snafu. So basically these 900 men crossed the river and were forgotten about for about 3 days. Most of them got killed. And the people in this little town basically saw the whole thing unfold. They knew the story of it. So these men basically dug in sort of like this horseshoe defensive perimeter, thus the name Battle of Horseshoe Woods, and just stayed there until finally their commander was able to relieve them. So it was sort of a grim story of a military blunder that even my dad and lots of the men who were there still have no idea of what happened.
So your father had an horrific moment.
Right, and it was
horrific experience
of abandonment, but I think because he couldn't go home and tell the story, or nobody, it wasn't like the D-Day story, and it was called the D-Day of Lorraine Valley. That was the nickname that the local people gave it because it was sort of a small scale, very horrific battle that sort of didn't have to happen. So, but the point of it, why I wanted to bring it up is when I came back and told my dad the story, just that I saw something released from him, like something shifted in him because now he at least knew, you know, not the whole consequence of where he got wounded, but, you know, kind of what happened. And to this day, the people in this little town every year have a huge ceremony to commemorate September 7th, the Battle of Horseshoe Woods, which I've been to before now. I've been to their 75th ceremony, and these people, the battlefield is still hollowed ground. There are still U.S. bodies, GIs, in those foxholes. It's like you can walk the foxhole perimeter. It's still shaped like a horseshoe.
Wow.
And to this day, they recover bodies, you know, and it's like these are dedicated people in France who, you know, they're a generation or two removed, but they were so impacted by it that they started an organization called Thanks GIs, which is a big French organization now that just, educates people in France about the war, and
why were they impacted by it so much? What did that mean? What did that battle mean to them?
Well,
just the heroic nature of the men digging in.
And that what the people in the town told me that I met, the older people, was that when the Germans occupied Paris and major cities, they were, not super nice, but when they occupied small towns like this, they were really ruthless. In other words, they did whatever they wanted. They were not under the control of sort of higher officers or authority. So this town had a particularly hard time during the war occupation. So when the GIs kind of came through, like my dad's group wasn't there specifically to liberate this town, but they blew the town open because of this event, and eventually the Germans obviously retreated from there. But I guess what I got to see was, look, we as a country haven't been invaded. We haven't had a war on our soil for over 150 years, but these people had lived around and experienced that we as pedestrians or civilians can't even begin to really imagine.
So your father survived D-Day, which is that's an amazing feat to survive that day, just how deadly that day was. And then he goes on to get involved in something like this as well. It's amazing that, he could even keep his senses about him or his wits about him and come back and be sane. I mean, I know that for me, if I was involved in things like that, it wouldn't be easy for me. I mean, I'm sure it's not easy for me, but it would be hard to recover from something like that. That's catastrophic, emotional.
And it made me, I definitely had a sense of not just respect for him, or admiration, but really, my God, like, how do you survive that experience when you're 18 or 19? So the D-Day experience, like I said, this experience in this little Battle of Horseshoe Woods was more intense than the D-Day experience. Okay, so, but again, because there was sort of a cloud in his mind, he couldn't really not find satisfaction, but he couldn't unravel from it until he knew more about the story. So since that time, literally now, you can Google this battle; it'll come up on the internet. And I've connected with lots of family and relatives who are related to people who've been at that battle, and we are basically, making a concerted effort to let them know we remain in the eye about the battle because they deserve to know about it, And but again, it was sort of like you said earlier. We talked about our grandfather and great grandfather. If he hadn't made it as a 10-year-old, we wouldn't be here. If my dad hadn't gotten through that, of course, I wouldn't. So I have an easier time of providing for my kids because of my dad and what lots of other men did back then.
Right. Like I was saying before, and first, that's an incredible story, and I don't mean to pull it back my way, but I'm just talking to you, knowing that we're related. We haven't known each other, but you just hear these layers of stories, like they're so like right side by side each other through like time, like slices of bread. And those stories and those experiences and how people are handling those experiences are, foundations for our life and our existence. I mean, it's freaky.
Yeah, and
I mean, if some things didn't change and they were very, very subtle changes, like you and I may not be talking right now.
Right.
The boy on the boat, he decides to jump off instead of, make it across the river, across the ocean, or something happens to him on the boat, or your father gets killed, in that second battle. You and I aren't having that conversation.
Yeah. And, I wouldn't want to inject myself into that kind of war scenario either. It's sort of like my moment came. I was a firefighter in the Boston area for many years. And, that's a whole different venue. We're working at these things. Nobody's shooting at us. It's a fire, kind of thing that we can pull back from if we get away from it. But when I think of people being cast into war for all the right reasons or all the wrong reasons, that, my mind gets kind of blown. And I think I started to say a little bit about when I was 18 and 19 and decided, hey, I'm going to see it. Can I be impactful in ending the war? And at the time, I learned, yes, I could counsel people in the military and not in the military about their options, that they could become a conscientious objector. They could go to prison for a few years if they didn't want to leave the country. And people did all those things. But what really blew my mind one day was I met this analyst at the time, and he said to me, look, the work you guys are doing is good. You're raising awareness. You're letting people know that the war is not based on anything really tangible. North Vietnam is not coming to the U.S. We're not doing anything. We're just stuck in a war that shouldn't have happened. And of course, I had friends there, so I wanted to honor and respect them and their choices to go there. But at the same time, I didn't want them there. And so what this analyst says to me, we're in this meeting, and he says, look, your intentions are good, but the war's not going to end for at least 3 or 4 more years. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And he says, well, this war is a little bit different. And even though the media is showing the GIs that are getting killed and explaining it, this war won't end until there are between 40 and 50,000 U.S. casualties. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And by then, at that point, there were 18 to 20,000 U.S. dead in the war. And I said, how can you say that? And I've come to respect him and understand him and some other people who work in these intelligence fields. He said, basically, when we get to between 40 and 50,000 U.S. casualties with our population base and where the draftees are coming from, at that point of, say, 40 to 50,000 U.S. deaths, everybody is going to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who lost somebody. And he said, that's when the public is going to look at this war for what it is. You know, now in World War II, that was different because the war, I'm not saying it was a vital, viable, important war, but when we reached that point, we kept fighting because we had to. But he was right. And he's later, and other people have later told me that the way our death counts happen from Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, we're not going to get that pushback because not enough of our populace is going to have that intimate connection with someone who knows someone who knows someone who lost someone.
It's true, but there were still a lot of people that were, you know, against those wars and have seen the wars and understand historically, or believe they understand historically what's happened. Like you said with the Vietnam War, like what was that all about? You know, why, you know, so since that war that's continued on. What's that all about? Well, that's some crazy stories, man. That's wild. So you basically you and your father sort of found some closure at the end.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Through talking through those experiences.
Yeah, and more him talking and me listening, but him feeling comfortable
enough.
Yeah, comfortable and you know, and driven by guilt. I mean, the worst story he told me was about one night he was they were going through a village and they were riding tanks. It was like late at night, and all of a sudden a bunch of hay bales burst up around them in fire, and they started getting shot at. Mm-hmm. And he said he turned and he fired once, and his clip came out of his gun. He had an M1, and usually it'd be fully loaded with 8 rounds. He said he must not have loaded it. He said, which is really weird. He reloaded it, and then he fired at 2 figures until they fell down. And he said the whole night was a mess like that. And he said he did not and does not to this day know if who he shot were French farmers or other GIs. Mm-hmm. And that's really something that he told me had haunted him more than other things that had happened. That when that happened, when they fired on each other, he said it was just awful. So that's what he tried to tell me.
Well, the whole war story is super interesting. It's scary at the same time to hear all that, the experiences that your father took. But the one thing that I'm taking away from this conversation is that your father got comfortable with someone, that someone being you towards the end of his life, to be comfortable enough to freely express the things that were the traumas or what was truly bothering him, and to release that before he passed away. And I think that was a blessing for him and a blessing for you, for sure. And I had some of that with my father at the end. My father got comfortable enough towards the end of his life. And I think one of the real, you know, just use the story as we're having this conversation, which, you know, like in life, different experiences flow into different understandings. You know, the conversations, you know, that I'm having with you tonight can also flow into a different understanding. And I think what I'm trying to get at is that if people can get comfortable enough to, you know, unconditionally, or to, you know, not to be, you know, restricted to express yourself to someone in a real way about how you feel about something, it's a real connection. And it sounds like you had that with your father. I had that through my migration through my first career into my second career, to be able to honestly communicate, you know, and express and receive that back. And I think a lot of people, if you know what I'm saying? That honesty, the integrity of the communication. A lot of people don't have that, but when you do have that, it's peaceful. It's very peaceful. It sounds like you and your father had that moment.
Yeah, and I don't think I had it growing up. I know he didn't, because we talked about like what are the things we're allowed to talk about. So by the end of his life, we were able to talk about anything and everything, and that was a gift because I hope I can do that with my own boys. Literally, I mean, that's the
Have
hurdle.
you?
Yeah, more and more increasingly. So I think that knowing I could create it with this man who I was very connected to and very distant to, and then reconnected to, was good. And what it did, it's funny because after that episode I told you about in France, I began to write. I began to research the battle. There was plenty of stuff out there, and once I met other GIs from the battle. I traveled around this country to meet it was fascinating, and I began writing a book about the story of the Battle of Horseshoe Woods, and all of a sudden, the book, which is still in manuscript form, shifted into a book about me and my dad. The battle was part of it, and then it shifted into a book about me and my dad and my childhood. And all of a sudden, a few months ago, I realized I'm writing a memoir, which is something I never expected to write or even wanted to write. And I think what's happening with that process is I'm now having those conversations with myself in the writing, meaning there might be things I'm not going to share with my kids yet or my wife, but I'm starting to, almost do a recapitulation of my life. Not that I'm getting ready to die tomorrow, but it's really cool to and kind of pen it down, because I think there's a lot we can all learn just from ourselves. We can look at our life.
No, absolutely, and it sounds like you had it. I mean, it's inspiring to hear your story. It's inspiring to hear how you look at those stories. I was fascinated that you took the time and had the energy and willingness to go to France, to that spot where the battle was. And then when you get there, they're remembering it by around the time that you happen to go there, and you don't even know that they're remembering it.
Yeah,
they're having some sort of homage to it.
Yeah, and it was a small ceremony, and then it was funny because after that, like I went back another time, and then for the 75th anniversary, which just got celebrated, like the D-Day anniversary was celebrated a year ago in September. So I mean in June. So they celebrated the Battle of Horseshoe Woods 75th anniversary last September 7th in 2019. So they invited me, and and the other American descendants, of which we picked together about 25 of us all went. So for the first time, I was there with 25 other people who were exactly connected like me. Some of them didn't even know till a month before they got there that this was the battle that their dad had been killed in or not killed in. And that was a fascinating experience. And it was also the first ceremony that the U.S. sent a representative to. So a consulate from Stuttgart, Germany, a woman came, but still no U.S. military. But the French military was out in droves. They did a reenactment of the crossing. They do pyrotechnics. The leaders of the group had invited me to read the original crossing orders, which they gave me, which were in this little cellophane piece of paper from Colonel Lemon, telling the guys how you can be relieved, and very emotional.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow.
And it's like, but again, it's really reflective of the community that this happened in. Like the GIs went off to the war and they were impacted hugely.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's interesting that the war is not generally known to the public historically, but to that town it is, because of how you were saying how that town was so beat up by those group of German soldiers and how they were treated and how the American GIs came through, and there's own little isolated history that they have there that you sort of fell into and found because of your father's experience there. It's interesting. What were you doing at the time? When you went over there and you traveled there, you were still in your teens, right?
Yeah, so I've been living up in New Hampshire. I run a business in town. So
Whoa! No, I'm going from you were there. You went to France and you come back. I'm saying, what were you doing at that time? Were you working? You're trying to stop the war. What career do you drive through from there? What happens to you from that point?
Very recently.
No, when you back. When did you go to that town in
I went
France?
about 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. Oh, I thought you were younger. When you did. What were you doing before you got to New Hampshire? What were you doing for work down in Connecticut? What was your career?
I wasn't in Connecticut, so I left Connecticut, went to Wisconsin, traveled around the world literally, and kind of settled in Boston. I was a firefighter for the Cambridge Fire Department. Began doing sculpture and music, and those things became sort of my vocation. So I'm a sculptor and a musician. When I moved to New Hampshire, I started a business with my wife, which is called Good Fortune Jewelry and Pawn. So we basically have a store that specializes in buying and selling secondhand jewelry, and also does pawn loaning for people.
And how do you get into that? How do you get into that story? How do you get into that business?
Literally selling real estate at the time, and I was doing kind of well with it, but then there was a recession. This is back in the 80s, right? And at that time, I was like, okay, so for me to keep selling the amount of real estate I'm doing, and I'm already working 40 to 50 hours a week, I'm going to have to work 70 to 80 hours a week. And I didn't want to do that because I had two small boys, like a 4 and an 8-year-old, and I didn't want to go away every weekend. So I began thinking about what else could I do for business, or life. And then I was kind of concerned. Well, I thought, well, if I'm going to start a business, I would hate to have the economy, sort of fracture my business. So I began reading books about the Great Depression to see, what kind of businesses, made it through the Great Depression kind of, unscathed. I mean, that was my intellect working. I had no interest in, I didn't know what I was going to do. And I kept reading about resale stores and secondhand stores. And then I read a little about pawn shops, and I didn't know that much about pawn shops, but I thought, well, a resale store, that's pretty simple. You just sell secondhand things, So
the pawn shop's really interesting though, because I never really knew what a pawn, not a porn, a pawn. How do I pronounce that correctly?
I think it's porn. Maybe it's pawn. I don't know. I think it's. So anyway, Jeff, I'll tell you this. So we started this store called Good Fortune, and then right away we started a pawn shop as part of it. But as people came in, and pawns are loans, PAWN. It's when somebody borrows money from you using an item of personal property for collateral. Right. So right around this time, I had to find some investors, right? So I call up one of my dear friends, and I say to her, hey, I'm starting this idea for a business. It's really cool. We loan people money. It's called a pawn shop. It's blah, 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 blah. So at the end, she says, well, I'd like to support you, and you're a really great friend, Roger, but I'm concerned. Why would you want to start a porn shop? So she had misunderstood me, but it was a pawn shop, PAWN, not POR.
She thought it was a porn shop.
It was a porn shop. It didn't fit with her model of me. And later, of course, I thought, well, probably if I started a porn shop, I would have made some good money. But hey, I was more about not wanting to work 80 hours a week, thinking if I could work in a place where my kids could find me after school, that might be nice, because they didn't know what the heck I did as a realtor. They just knew I got in my car for the day,
Yeah. Well, the good thing is my son's been able to come to my aviation facilities and see me, so he has an understanding. But before I met you, I just thought a pawn shop was just, I need money. Here's my gold watch. You want to buy it for me and give me some money? That's what I thought it was. I didn't realize that people were putting up collateral of something of value, and then you were loaning them money. Well, what are the terms like on these loans typically? Give me a few examples.
Yeah. So basically, and I'll give you some examples about the whole industry. So first of all, what do you think the average loan is in the U.S.? Like, just off the top of your head, when people come in a pawn shop, what do you think the average dollar amount is they borrow?
$500.
Okay, good. So, good guess, by the way. Okay, so it's not that; it's $100.
Really?
Yeah. So we're part of the National Pawn Association. There are about 9,000 pawn shops in the U.S. Many of them are multi-generational stores that go back 100 years. So basically, the average in all those stores is $100, roughly speaking. So that means there are people coming in to borrow $30 and $40 and $50 and $60, and there are plenty of people coming in to borrow $1,000 and $12,000 and $20,000 too. But the average number comes in at 100. So that gives you an idea of something, and I won't say what that something is, but there's some need that goes on in our country about money.
Let me ask you a question. People on average now go to a pawn shop to borrow $100?
That's the national loan average in the industry right now. And it's been that for many, many, many years.
And how long is it? What's the average term to repay that?
Average term is 30 days. So these are short-term loans. So it's basically somebody, and I'll say this with great confidence, from many different walks of life. In other words, it's usually somebody who's gainfully employed, because most people who do a loan of any kind know how they're going to pay it back. They have to have some income coming in. So most all our customers are well employed. They come from just about any profession you can think of and name. We've done loans to police officers or doctors for different amounts.
But let me back up for a second. I'm baffled by this. $
100, yeah.
$100. So I I don't even know how to back into it, because in this day and age, $100 can get, it's like a couple of movie tickets, popcorn, and maybe a few slices of pizza and a liter of Diet Coke, and you're getting close to $100. And it's like, the tightness involved in, requiring an extra $100 must mean that, the people are really, really tight.
Yeah.
Beyond tight.
Yeah. So, and without saying again categorically that people use money for this or that, most people who come to pawn shops aren't coming for those groceries you just mentioned. Okay. But they might have a bill that's due, or they might have a set of tires they need for their car, for their kid's car. They might have a college tuition payment that's due. They might have a home mortgage that's behind a month.
So $100, they need that extra $100 to get to $1,000, or the extra 100 to get to 300. Is that what it is?
Not everybody, but somebody who's making rent, and let's say the rent payment is $900 and they're short 100 to 200 bucks, that might happen.
Okay,
so he's got a mortgage
that's
$2,000 to $4,000 bucks, might come and ask us for $3,000 one month. You know what I mean? So we as pawnbrokers don't have to qualify the use of their money, which is different than a bank that might want to know what you're going to do with the money.
What's the percentage that you work on? What's your interest rate?
Yeah, so the pawn industry is configured differently. We're outside of the banking regs for a number of reasons, but our loans basically sometimes take a while to determine and qualify. And so somebody might come in with an item that we've loaned on before, like they come in with a TV set, and we know the customer, we know the TV set's worth $300, used, so we can give them $100 or $200 on it. But sometimes they bring in a ring or something that we've got to spend 10 minutes or an hour evaluating. So basically, they're called service fees around the country, but they vary state to state. The average is about 10 to 15% per month. So somebody who borrows $100 at 15% service fee pays back $15 plus the 100. So they pay back $115.
Well, you do a lot of small loans, so it's hard to, make all those loans up. I mean, what's the biggest loan you've ever done?
Probably $20,000.
And what was the term to pay back?
Same thing. It was a month, but we lowered the service fees considerably.
Okay, so these loans never go longer than a month.
No, they do. So here's the other thing. Somebody can renew a loan if they're not able to pay it back. The way the law in New Hampshire is set up is if somebody doesn't come back after 30 days, we're going to hold it for 90 more days. And then we're going to send them a letter saying, hey, it's here 4 months later. We're going to sell it unless you want it. So most pawnbrokers, contrary to what people think, want their loan customer to remain as an active, viable loan customer. They don't want to foreclose on the property.
Have you guys lost business opportunity to, like, eBay? People can go and sell things right away. There's Facebook has a Facebook sell site. People can go sell things for money now instead of going to you, because they have so much, access to expose to whatever the piece of shit they're selling, whatever it may be.
And piece of shit could be the right word for something, but the portion of a business that, like you said, people think a pawn shop is buying and selling. Yes, we absolutely do that, but our dominant theme are these collateral loans. But yeah, eBay, Craigslist, everything like that has impacted people's awareness, yard sales for selling inventory pre-owned person to person, with the exception of firearms and high-end jewelry. So that's the avenue and venue we live in, like high-end jewelry. That's our dominant theme for loans and purchasing and selling. Like the pre-owned jewelry market is a wonderful place for people to live in. Everyone knows a used car value, a used house value, but as more and more people learn that used ring value is incredible as a bargain. So we're seeing that business always grow. We're in the firearm business, but not extensively. It's a small part of what we do. But again, those seem to hold value for people. And yeah.
Well, you know what? I'm starting to look around at all the things in my house. I'm wondering if I just fill up my SUV with all the things in my house that I don't use, that maybe I could just, do you buy things, or it has to be on a loan?
Yeah, no, we buy things too, but we're very specific about we buy, and this makes sense too. We only buy what we know we can resell.
Which is what? Jewelry and firearms?
Oh no, it's collectibles, sculpture, it's electronics. It's definitely laptops and cameras.
Okay.
It can be ladies' handbags. I mean, it can be all sorts of stuff. But it's typically the things that one might think of, like the TVs. VCRs, we'll forget them. Electronics are becoming so outdated so quickly that we used to have a good business of buying and selling iPhones. Nope, no more. It's like, so that industry has changed, but predominantly for us, it's jewelry and then gold coins and silver coins and bullion. So that's a big part of pawn shop. You could say diet. We're seeing more people collect gold and silver and hold it in tangible form rather than in stock ownership, if that makes sense.
Right.
That's a big part of our company. And look, we're in a little town in New Hampshire, but we still have people coming in who spend a lot of money buying and selling diamond rings because they love diamond rings, and if they buy a diamond ring that's used or one that's new, it's the same exact diamond, but if they're buying it used, they're saving 50 to 80% on the price right off the bat.
Listen, you know what? If my wife keeps on annoying me, I'm going to go take her diamond ring that I bought her. I'm going to bring it up to you and see what it's worth. I got to make a road trip up to New Hampshire to see you. I'm going to fill up my SUV. I have tons of electronics. I have jewelry. I have all kinds of different crap in my rooms here. I'm just going to go up and go on a vacation in New Hampshire and come home maybe with $5,000, hopefully.
Well, come see us. Come on a vacation. Don't bring us any crap. You can throw that out on the road or at the landfill. I'm
going to sell someone. I'm going to pay for my trip. I'm going to pay for my gas. I'm going to bring up some interesting things that you can buy. But this has definitely been an interesting conversation, Roger. I learned some new things about you today that I didn't know. And hopefully we learned a little bit about each other, but definitely we learned a lot about you. I think you're a really interesting guy. I think you're a special guy, extremely insightful, super intelligent, and very kind, warm-hearted person. And I'm glad that I had the opportunity tonight to talk to you. Thank you.
No, it's really been nice chatting it up with you. And I'm so appreciative that we've connected with each other as family and friends, because there does seem to be this thing about family that I'm understanding very slowly, that there are connections between all of us, really. But I kind of sought you out because I want to do that in my life. I want to connect with distant relatives if I can find out who they are. It's a cool thing.
Well, look who you met me. I mean, come on, it doesn't get any better than this. I'm kidding.
Right. I like how humble you are too. That's nice.
It was a joke. It was a joke.
I know.
No, but I'm saying, look, I've expressed that you're a very interesting person. I'm saying we both didn't know each other, and then haphazardly we met, and very interesting stories and very worthwhile and definitely advantageous to have each other in each other's lives. So I appreciate it very much. And you need to get your wife off the Zoom connection next time we talk, because your internet connection is horrible. But whatever.
Yeah. What we need to do is get better service. We're running DSL with basically upload of 2 megabytes, download of
oh my God,
25. Now in our office in Keene, 10 miles away, we've got super fast internet, but that's not where we're living right now. And this is, again, if you want to look at the country and some aspects of what works and doesn't work, we have very good service compared to neighbors of ours who have zero service, and that's hard for us to fathom. And I'm not sure it's the government's job to bring high-speed internet to the populace, but back when they decided to bring electricity to everybody, it helped the general economy of the whole country grow.
Mm-hmm. I got one thing to say to you, but I don't want to forget about this. Yeah. Look into the Elon Musk's Starlink. His satellite Wi-Fi.
Yeah, my son signed us up for it when it comes out already. Yeah, no, we hear it. It's great. So that's going to be a great experience for people, not even from an economical business point, but just from a connectivity point, because as you and I know, these are devices now that do keep friends and family together.
No, but that you are a perfect candidate for Elon Musk's Starlink. I'm plugging Elon Musk. I appreciate the work that he's doing. But a guy like you who's got 20-year-old freaking modem connection, you need a Starlink connection. On that note, I'm going to say goodnight and thank you, and I appreciate it very much, Robert. Have a good evening. Thank you. Well, I'm glad you're on the show.